A $10,000 decision made in the wrong year costs $67,000, not because of the money spent, because of the money that never had the chance to compound. That number, 67,000, is what 7 years of modest growth does to $10,000 sitting in the right position. Most people will not look at that math directly. It is more comfortable to treat the decision as just $10,000 and move on. You are carrying a number right now. Maybe it is the gap between what you earn and what you need. Maybe it is the age you told yourself you would have things figured out by. That number has weight. The math behind it has more. Here is the part no one has said plainly enough to you. This is not a patience problem. It is not a discipline problem. It is not a you problem. It is a timing problem. Specifically, it is a window problem. There are narrow stretches of time in a person's financial life when the conditions align in a way that makes movement not just possible, but disproportionately powerful. Most people never recognize those stretches while they are inside them. They feel them afterward. Years later, they point to a period of 18 months or 2 years and say, "That was when everything could have been different." You are inside one of those stretches right now. Not in theory, not as a motivational frame designed to create urgency. The specific conditions that make this window real, finite, and closing are not things you have been told to look for. Most of what you have heard about building wealth was written for a different moment than this one. By the time you finish what follows, you will see this window clearly. And once you see it clearly, you will not be able to unsee it. Chapter 1. The window is open right now, not tomorrow. There is a pattern that repeats across every civilization that has ever found its footing after a period of chaos. In every era, across every kind of economy, a brief window appears. It does not announce itself. It does not send a warning. And when it closes completely. The way a tide pulls back from the shore so fast that people standing on the sand are still looking at the water when the moment passes. A small number of people feel the window opening. Most people sense it too late. What separates them is not intelligence, and it is not luck. It is something more specific than that. Something you are about to understand in a way that most people around you never will. You are inside one of those windows right now. This chapter will show you exactly where you are standing, what is behind you, and what is directly in front of you, if you choose to step forward before this particular window closes. Here is the question this chapter will put in your mind. It will stay there until you have the full answer. Why do some people end up wealthy from the same economic moment that leaves other people exactly where they started? Hold that question. Let it sit. The answer is not what you have been told. The year 1946 produced more self-made millionaires per capita in the United States than almost any year in recorded history. Not the roaring 1920s, not the dot-com 90s. 1946, a year most people associate with exhaustion, with soldiers returning home, with rationing still fresh in everyone's memory. The economy was uncertain. Jobs were unclear. Nobody had a clean roadmap. And yet something happened in those years just after the war ended. Ordinary people built lasting wealth. Not flashy wealth, the quiet, compound kind that paid for their grandchildren's educations decades later. The people who stepped into that window bought property when everyone else said prices were unstable. They started businesses when everyone else said the climate was unclear. They made irreversible decisions at the exact moment when reversing course still felt like the safer option. The people who waited for certainty watched the window close. Move forward 22 years, 1968. The world felt like it was tearing at its own seams. Political upheaval, social unrest, financial markets swinging like a pendulum with a broken mechanism. Most people pulled back. They waited. They told themselves that acting during uncertainty was reckless, and that patience was wisdom. But a specific group of people in that same environment saw something different. They saw that when everyone contracts, space opens. They saw that distracted markets create underpriced assets. They saw the window. And they stepped through it. During the years from 1968 to 1973, they built positions in real estate, in small businesses, in skills and partnerships that the next 30 years would reward at rates that feel almost fictional to look at now. The people who waited for the storm to pass had already missed the sun. Jump again, 1994. The internet was a strange new thing that most people dismissed as a toy for academics and enthusiasts. The people who treated it as infrastructure, who invested time and money and creative energy into understanding it before the rest of the world caught up, did not just get rich. They built entirely new categories of wealth. Not all of them became household names. Most were simply ordinary people who recognized a specific structural shift and acted while the shift was still early enough to matter. By 2001, the first window had closed. The people who jumped in during the 2000 bubble thought they were still in the early window. They were not. The window that mattered was the quiet one from 1994 to 1998, when almost nobody was paying attention. 3 different eras, 3 different windows, one consistent truth. The window always looks uncertain from the inside. That is not a flaw in the design. It is the design. Certainty and opportunity are enemies. By the time a moment feels safe enough to act on, the people who acted when it felt uncertain are already 3 years ahead of you. Look back at the season you were in before these last 3 years unfolded without polishing the memory. Think about the specific things you considered doing, the moves you almost made, the ideas you set aside because the timing felt wrong or your savings felt too thin, or you needed just a little more information before you committed. Think about one thing in particular, one decision you deferred. Where would you be right now if you had made that move? Do not rush past that question. Let it settle exactly where it lands. Because that feeling, that specific ache of recognizing a window you did not step through, is not meant to punish you. It is meant to orient you. It is the clearest signal your own life can give you that windows are real, that they are finite, and that the next one is already open. You are inside one now. This is not rhetoric. The economic and behavioral conditions that define a genuine wealth window are specific, and they are measurable. A genuine window requires 3 elements operating at the same time. First, there must be a structural disruption, something that has permanently changed the rules of how money moves, how work is valued, or how assets are priced. Second, there must be a widespread hesitation, a collective pause where most people are waiting rather than acting, which creates space for those who are not waiting. Third, there must be a closing mechanism, a clear reason why the window will not stay open indefinitely. Right now, all 3 conditions are present. The structural disruption is not one thing. It is the collision of several things happening simultaneously: how people earn, how businesses operate, how assets are created and owned, how the cost of starting something has collapsed in ways that were not possible 15 years ago. These are not trends. Trends reverse. These are structural shifts. And the difference between a trend and a structural shift is that a structural shift does not undo itself. The widespread hesitation is everywhere around you. You feel it in conversations. People are cautious. People are watching. People are consuming enormous amounts of content about money and wealth and opportunity without translating any of it into action. That hesitation is not stupidity. It comes from a real and understandable fear. But fear, when it is shared by the majority of people simultaneously, is the precise condition that creates the most space for the minority who move anyway. And the closing mechanism is the one you need to understand with complete clarity. It is not a date on a calendar. Economic windows do not close on a schedule. They close when the hesitation dissolves, when enough people finally feel confident enough to act, which is always, every single time, the moment the best positions are already gone. The window does not close because the opportunity disappears. It closes because the opportunity gets priced correctly, because competition floods in, because the early mover advantage evaporates. The 18 months ahead of you are not arbitrary. They represent the specific span during which the structural shifts currently underway will transition from misunderstood to obvious. Right now they are misunderstood by the majority. That is what makes them valuable. The moment they become obvious, and prices will adjust, spaces will fill, and the people who moved during the misunderstood phase will look like they got lucky. They will not have been lucky. They will have been early. This is where the villain of your financial life lives, not in a bad economy, not in your income level, not in the timing of when you were born. The villain is the comfortable paralysis that has learned to speak in the language of responsibility. It says, wait until you have more saved. It says, learn a little more first. It says, the time is almost right, just not quite yet. It masquerades as prudence. It dresses itself up as patience. But it is neither of those things. It is delay made comfortable, and it has cost more people more wealth than any external economic force ever has. Here is a man named Daniel. Daniel was 31 years old and working a steady job in logistics. He had been watching the real estate market in his mid-sized city for 2 years. He had attended 3 free seminars. He had read 4 books. He had built a spreadsheet with 14 tabs analyzing potential properties. He was not lazy. He was thorough. But thorough had become a wall he stood behind rather than a foundation he built on. In the spring of one particular year, the specific neighborhood he had been watching for 18 months saw a wave of purchases from outside investors. In 6 weeks, the prices he had been tracking moved past the point where his numbers worked. The window that had been open for 2 years closed in 6 weeks. Daniel did not lose money. He simply stayed exactly where he was while the opportunity moved on without him. He had all the information he needed, a year before it mattered. What Daniel could not see, while he was inside his very thorough preparation, was that preparation had become his product. He was producing preparation instead of producing action. And the economic world does not reward preparation. It rewards execution during the window. Now you have the answer to the question this chapter opened with. Why do some people end up wealthy from the same economic moment that leaves other people exactly where they started? It is not that the wealthy people had better information. It is not that they took reckless risks. It is that they understood something about windows. They understood that the cost of acting during uncertainty is always smaller than the cost of waiting until uncertainty resolves. A little later, you will come to a point about risk that runs straight against the usual belief. Once that lands, it immediately changes every financial decision you make from that point forward. But the chapter you are in right now ends with this. The window is open, the tide is full, the shore is right there, and you are standing at the exact edge of it. What you do in the next 18 months will not feel dramatic while you are doing it. It will feel like small, unglamorous, slightly uncomfortable decisions made one after another. But each one is a step through the window. And the window does not wait. So the real question is not whether you are ready. The real question is this: what will it cost you to wait until you feel ready? Chapter 2: Why Smart People Always Wait Too Long. You already know what you need to do. That is the part nobody talks about. You have known for months, maybe longer, and you still have not done it. Almost every person who is sitting still financially right now believes the same thing about themselves. They believe they are not ready yet. They believe a little more preparation will close the gap. They are wrong, not slightly wrong. Structurally, fundamentally, completely wrong. And the most dangerous part is that their preparation feels responsible. It feels like wisdom. It looks, from the outside, exactly like what a careful and intelligent person should do. This chapter is about what that feeling is actually costing you, and why the smartest people in any room are usually the ones paying that cost the longest. The last chapter ended by raising a question, and that thread is still live. What will it cost you to wait until you feel ready? Hold that question. Do not answer it yet. Let it sit somewhere behind everything you read next. By the time this chapter ends, you will not need to answer it. The answer will have already arrived on its own. Meet Robert. Robert is 31 years old. He has a good job, a tidy apartment, and 3 external hard drives full of research. He has read 47 books on investing, real estate, and personal finance. He has a spreadsheet with 9 tabs, color-coded, updated every Sunday morning with his coffee. He knows the terminology. He knows the tax implications. He has had 3 separate conversations with people who have already done what he wants to do, and he took notes during all 3 of them. He is, by every visible measure, more prepared than most people who have already started. He has been almost ready for 2 years. This year, Robert discovered a real estate market 2 hours from where he lives that fits every criterion on his list. Cash flow positive, low vacancy rates, price points within his range, a growing employment base nearby. He found it in April. He is still researching it now. He added a 10th tab to the spreadsheet. He told himself he wanted to understand the seasonal trends before committing. Then he told himself he needed a deeper emergency fund. Then he told himself the market might dip if interest rates moved. Then he found a podcast series on commercial versus residential and decided he should finish that before narrowing his focus. Robert is not lazy. That is the crucial thing to understand. Robert is one of the most disciplined people you will ever picture. He wakes up at 5:30. He reads every morning. He is genuinely, sincerely trying to get this right. But Robert is caught in a loop. The preparation loop is not about preparation at all. That is what makes it so difficult to see from inside it. The loop is about risk management. Every new piece of research feels like a reduction in risk. Every new podcast, every new spreadsheet tab, every new conversation with someone who already owns property. Each one feels like it brings Robert one step closer to certainty. And certainty, Robert believes, is when he will be ready to move. Here is the problem. Certainty does not exist. It never did. The people who moved before Robert did not move because they had more information. They moved because they accepted at some point that the information would never be complete. They made a bet. A calculated, researched, studied bet, but a bet nonetheless. And every week Robert spends adding to his spreadsheet. Another person who knew less than him in January bought a property in that market. Return to the season you were in before these last 3 years unfolded, without polishing the memory. Not in terms of your goals or your income. Just think about what you knew. Think about what felt uncertain then that feels obvious now. 3 years ago, you probably believed you needed to understand more before you could do more. And now, looking back, you can see that the people who acted on half the knowledge you had then are further ahead than you are today. Not because they were smarter, because they moved. That is not a comfortable thing to sit with, but here it is. The preparation loop is not a knowledge problem. It is a deadline problem. Preparation without a deadline is indistinguishable from avoidance. Read that again slowly. Because it is not an insult, it is a diagnosis. Robert is not avoiding success. Robert is avoiding the specific, nameable fear that lives underneath action. The fear that he will do everything right and it still will not work. The fear that if he waits, that failure cannot happen because you cannot fail at something you have not yet attempted. Waiting feels like safety. It is not safety. It is the slow, invisible drain of a window you are not stepping through. The tide does not hold. You have seen this on a shore or you have imagined it, which works just as well. The tide comes in and creates a moment, a channel opens. The water is high enough you could cross. And if you stand there studying the water instead of moving through it, the tide recedes. The channel closes. Here is the part that people do not say out loud. The tide will come back, yes, but not to the same shore in the same way at the same time. The next tide is a different opportunity. It requires a different response. And every time you watch a tide go out, watching becomes slightly more comfortable and moving becomes slightly more foreign. Robert is watching tides. He knows it too. That is the quiet tragedy of the preparation loop. The people inside it are almost always aware that something is wrong. They just misdiagnose what that something is. They tell themselves they need more time, more data, more certainty. What they actually need is a date. A specific, irreversible, written-down date by which they will have moved or not moved. And they will live with the result either way. There is a sharp difference between decisions that are reversible and decisions that are not. Most people in the preparation loop are convinced they are preparing for an irreversible decision. That is why the stakes feel so high. That is why more research always feels justified. But here is what they miss. Inaction is also irreversible. Every week that passes without a move is a week you will never get back. You cannot research your way into yesterday. You cannot spreadsheet your way into last April when that market was still underpriced. Time only moves in one direction. So why are the smartest people in the room always the last to act? That is the question that opens a complicated door. Intelligent people are good at building cases. They can construct a detailed, logical, airtight argument for why now is not the right moment. They can identify risks that less analytical people would never even think to look for. This is a genuine skill. It is also, in the wrong hands, a trap that looks like sophistication. When your ability to see risk is stronger than your tolerance for it, you do not invest. You research the investment. A woman named Diane spent 8 months designing the perfect business plan for a food delivery service in her city. She studied competitors, ran projected financials, interviewed potential customers, and revised her pricing model 4 times. Her plan, when she finally finished it, was excellent. Clean, realistic, grounded. She showed it to a friend who had opened a restaurant. The friend told her it was the best plan she had seen from someone who had never opened a business. Then the friend asked her when she was going to launch. Diane said she was almost ready. Her friend paused. Then she said, "You will be ready when you have a customer, not when you have a plan." Diane launched the following month with a plan that was 70% complete and a launch date she could not take back. Within the first 6 weeks, she learned more about her actual business than 8 months of research had given her. The plan changed almost entirely, and none of the 8 months of preparation predicted exactly which parts would change. That is what action gives you that preparation cannot. Real information. The kind that only comes from contact with the actual world, not the modeled version of it inside a spreadsheet. Further on, you will come to a point about risk that runs straight against the usual belief. When that becomes clear, it immediately changes every financial decision you make going forward. But right now, the thing that matters is Robert. Robert is still in his apartment. His spreadsheet is still open. The market he found in April is still there, slightly different from when he first saw it, but still there. He has not lost the opportunity yet. The window is still open, not as wide as it was, but open. And somewhere in the gap between where Robert is and where he could be, there is a single missing piece that no amount of research will give him. The cure for what Robert has is not more information. It is a deadline he cannot negotiate. That is the next chapter. Preparation without a deadline is just a longer way of standing still. Chapter 3. The tide does not negotiate with the shoreline. Saving more money will not make you wealthy. That sounds like the kind of advice a reckless person gives to justify spending. It is not. It is an observation about what actually separates the people who build lasting wealth from the people who spend decades doing everything correctly and still arrive at 50 wondering why the numbers never added up. The missing variable is not discipline. It is timing. If you have spent the last few years grinding hard, spending carefully, doing what you were told, and still feel like you are running on a treadmill someone else controls, this chapter is the reason why. There is a force moving underneath your financial life right now. Something larger than your habits. Something older than your ambitions. Understanding it will not just change what you do with money. It will change when you do it. That difference, the when, is worth more than almost any how you have ever been given. Preparation without a deadline is just a longer way of standing still. That was where the last chapter left you, and that sentence deserves a moment to settle. The question it opens is one most people never actually ask. If preparation without a deadline is just standing still, then what sets the deadline? Not your confidence, not your savings account crossing some magic threshold. Not the moment you finally feel ready, because that moment, left to its own devices, tends to arrive about 3 years after the window has already closed. The deadline is set by the tide. Here is what that means. Every generation of wealth builders, not the famous ones, not the names in business profiles, but the ordinary people who ended their lives financially comfortable while their neighbors did not, every one of them had something in common. They did not simply work harder than the people around them. They moved when the water was high. They borrowed, invested, started, or repositioned during a specific window of economic expansion, and then they held what they built during the long, flat stretches that followed. They were not geniuses. Most of them could not have explained the mechanism behind what they did. They just felt the pull of the moment and responded to it rather than waiting for certainty. The people who missed that window were not lazier or less capable. Most of them were just one step behind the rhythm. They waited until the evidence was overwhelming, until every newspaper confirmed what was already happening, until the risk felt smaller. By then the tide had already peaked and begun its slow, indifferent retreat. Picture the season you were in before these last 3 years unfolded without polishing the memory. Not emotionally, not in terms of goals. Financially. Think about a specific decision you considered and delayed. A property you looked at. A skill you almost invested in. A side project you mapped out on a Sunday afternoon and then filed away. What would the number look like today if you had moved then? Not because you would have gotten everything right, because you would have been moving with the current instead of analyzing it from the bank. That question is not meant to produce regret. It is meant to show you something about the nature of cycles. Cycles do not pause for reflection. They move. Economic history, stripped of all its jargon, follows a rhythm that repeats in roughly 15 to 20-year intervals. Contraction follows expansion. Credit tightens after it loosens. Asset prices reset after they climb. The specific triggers change, a banking crisis here, a technology shock there, a sudden rebalancing of global supply chains. But the underlying shape of the cycle is recognizable if you know what you are looking for. Expansion creates wealth. Contraction consolidates it. And the window between them, the window where ordinary people with ordinary resources can still move decisively before prices and barriers close up. That window is brief, irregular, and almost always disguised as a period of uncertainty rather than a period of opportunity. We are inside one of those windows right now. The contraction that reshaped the financial landscape over the last several years did something that contractions always do. It displaced capital. It disrupted the old hierarchies of who owned what and who had access to which opportunities. Real estate shifted. New industries absorbed the workers that old industries shed. Remote work broke geographic barriers that had kept certain opportunities locked inside certain cities. Small businesses failed, leaving gaps that leaner, faster operations could fill. Asset prices in several categories corrected to levels that had not existed in years. Credit, though tighter in some places, became more creative in others, new platforms, new instruments, new ways for someone without a banking relationship to access capital that would have been invisible to them a decade ago. This is the part where the tide metaphor becomes more than poetic. When the ocean pulls back before a strong surge, the shoreline is briefly exposed. Things are visible that are usually underwater: structures, channels, the actual shape of the seafloor. The people who understand the pattern recognize that exposure as a signal. The tide is not gone. It is gathering. What looks like retreat is actually the precondition for the next rise. The current economic moment has that quality. The contraction revealed the shape of things. Certain sectors contracted so hard that their barriers to entry dropped with them. Certain skills became scarce, and therefore valuable almost overnight. Certain geographic and digital markets that were overheated and inaccessible for years reset to levels where someone starting with modest resources could actually get a foothold. That foothold is available right now, but it will not remain available. Here is what most financial advice completely misses. It treats every year as equivalent. Save this percentage of your income. Invest consistently regardless of conditions. Build slowly and steadily over time. That advice is not wrong exactly, but it is advice designed for someone who has already missed the window and needs a safe path forward. It is advice for the flat part of the cycle. It does not account for the fact that a single 18-month window of correctly timed, correctly directed action can produce more financial movement than a decade of disciplined, consistent, perfectly executed routine. The tide does not care about your routine. It rises on its own schedule. Let me tell you about Marcus. He was 31, renting an apartment in a mid-sized city, working in logistics management, earning a decent salary. He had always been careful with money, never frivolous, never reckless, saved a modest amount each month, read the right books. When the industry he worked in began contracting, he did not panic. He had savings. He had time. He spent 6 months being thoughtful. He researched. He ran numbers on 3 different ideas. He compared options carefully and rationally. Then he spent another 4 months being more thoughtful. He refined his analysis. He talked to people he trusted. He revised his projections. He wanted to be certain. By the time Marcus moved, he started a small freight coordination consultancy aimed at the exact market gap the contraction had created. The gap had begun to close. Other people, less analytical, less prepared, had already moved into that space. Not because they were smarter, because they understood, even if they could not have articulated it, that the window had a closing time. Marcus built something decent in the end, but the version of his business that could have dominated that market window existed only for about 14 months. He arrived in month 17. He told someone later that he felt like he had reached the airport gate while the jetway was still attached, then stood there deciding whether he really wanted to take the trip. 14 months. That is the granularity we are talking about. Now for the open loop that has been threading through this chapter since the first paragraph. Saving more money will not make you wealthy. That claim needs its full explanation. It is not an argument against saving. It is an argument against the belief that accumulation and preparation are the same thing as positioning. Saving builds a tool. Positioning means picking up the tool at the right moment and swinging it in the right direction. A hammer sitting in a drawer does nothing to the nail. And a tide that has risen fully, reached its peak, and begun retreating is indifferent to how long and carefully you packed your bag before you walked to the beach. The money you have right now, whether it is $1,200 or $12,000 or more, is your tide window resource. It is not an end. It is a lever. A lever only produces force when it is engaged against resistance at the right moment, with the right fulcrum. The question is not whether you have enough. The question is whether you will position what you have before the water crests. This is the revelation, stated plainly. Wealth is not built gradually across all time equally. It is built in concentrated bursts during specific economic phases, by people who recognized those phases for what they were and acted before certainty arrived. Certainty is a luxury the tide does not offer. The tide offers timing. What you do with that timing is the only variable actually in your control. Later in this book, you will encounter something that directly contradicts what most people believe about risk. After that clicks, it immediately changes what you are willing to do next. But for now, hold this. The shoreline does not get a vote. The water does not slow to accommodate the person still deciding whether to swim. The tide rose before you arrived, and it will recede after you leave, on a schedule that has no entry in your calendar and no care for your readiness. The only question that matters is whether you were in the water when it was high. Chapter 4. The 3 moves that must happen in this window. Money is leaving your life right now, not in a way you can see on a receipt or feel in your hands. It is leaving in the form of distance, the growing distance between where you are and where you could be if you had made 1 or 2 different moves in the last 12 months. That distance is not fixed. It is compounding. Every week that passes without the right financial action does not simply cost you that week. It costs you everything that week would have seeded. The investment you did not start. The income stream you did not build. The position you did not take while conditions still made it accessible. None of it announces itself as it leaves. It simply does not arrive. That is the nature of this particular kind of loss. It happens in the silence, in the delay, in the comfortable feeling that there will always be another good time. There will not always be another good time. And the reason you have not heard that stated plainly enough is that most financial advice is written for all times, not this time. That is exactly where we need to begin. The previous chapter ended with a question about the tide, whether you were in the water when it was high. Most people watch the tide from the shore. They read about it. They plan for it. They tell themselves they will go in when the water is just right, when they feel ready, when one more thing is settled. And then the water recedes, and they are standing on dry sand holding their towel, wondering what happened. What happened is that the window moved without them. But here is what almost no one explains. Inside any real wealth window, there are specific moves, not general habits, not broad principles. Specific, executable moves that are optimized for this precise moment, this particular combination of economic conditions, personal leverage, and available time. Do those moves in a different window and they produce half the result. Miss this window entirely, and you will spend years trying to recreate conditions that may not return in the same form. Generic advice given inside a specific window is not just unhelpful. It is a kind of malpractice. So let us talk about the 3 moves that must happen inside the next 18 months. Here is the open question you should hold in your mind as this chapter unfolds. Why do capable people, people who understand these moves intellectually, consistently fail to execute them? We will come back to that. It is the most important thing in this chapter, and it is not what you expect the answer to be. The first move is this: close the distance between your income and your cost of living, and do it through added output, not reduced expense. This distinction sounds small. It is not small. There are 2 ways to create financial breathing room. You can cut what you spend, or you can grow what you earn. Cutting feels safe and manageable and immediately visible. It also has a hard ceiling. You cannot cut your way to wealth. You can only preserve what already exists. Growing your output has no ceiling. Adding an income stream, monetizing a skill you already use, converting your labor into something that compounds rather than resets each month, none of that has a limit. It also feels harder, riskier, less certain, which is precisely why most people choose the scissors over the shovel. The math of this first move is stark. If your monthly income is $3,000 and your expenses are $2,700, you have $300 of potential momentum. Cut $200 from expenses and that momentum becomes $500. Add $500 in income and it becomes $800. Add another $500 and it becomes $1,300. The ceiling on cutting disappears the moment you shift from subtraction to creation. This window, right now, in the next 18 months, rewards creators. Platforms that pay independent earners are more accessible than they have ever been. Skills that used to require institutional employment now trade freely. If you have a skill, you have an asset. The first move is converting that asset into flowing income, not sitting on it as potential. Revisit the season you were in before these last 3 years unfolded, without polishing the memory. The version of you that existed then, what did you know how to do that you are still only using in one context? What did people ask you for help with that you gave away freely because charging felt strange? That thing. That is likely your first move. not as a permanent replacement for your current income. As a second engine that runs alongside it, that grows while you sleep, that does not reset to zero on the first of every month. The second move is this: acquire one asset inside the window that you will still hold when the window closes. One. Just one. Not a portfolio. Not a diversified strategy. One thing you own that has the potential to be worth significantly more 18 months from now than it is today, and that you will not sell the moment it fluctuates. The specifics depend on your situation, but the principle is immovable. Wealth is not built from income alone. Income funds life. Assets build futures. The difference between someone who earns $100,000 a year and someone who earns $40,000 but holds appreciating assets is visible only over time, but it is enormous. By year 5, the asset holder has built something that works without them. The income earner starts over every January. The window matters here because asset prices respond to conditions. Entry points that exist right now will not exist at the same terms in 5 years. This is not speculation. It is documented across every wealth cycle in modern economic history. The people who built durable wealth were, almost without exception, the people who acquired assets during a specific period of accessibility and then held them through volatility that scared everyone else out. Timing is not about picking the perfect day. It is about being inside the right general window and not leaving prematurely. One asset, owned, held, that is the second move. Now here is something that directly contradicts what most people believe about patience, and later in this book you will encounter the full explanation of it. For now, hold this. Patience in wealth building is not passive. It is the most aggressive strategy available to someone without excessive capital. We will come back to this, and the resolution will change how you use time. The third move is the one that almost never appears on lists like this, which is precisely why most people skip it, and then cannot understand why the first two moves underperform. The third move is this: eliminate one financial relationship that is costing you more than it is giving you. 1. A debt structure, a subscription, a financial product you signed up for when you were less informed, a business arrangement where you do more than you receive. Something in your financial life that is extracting value from you month after month with no corresponding return. The reason this move belongs on the same list as income creation and asset acquisition is that cash flow is not just about what comes in. It is about what stays. A leak in the hull does not care how hard you row. You can build income and acquire assets while a quiet drain runs underneath everything, and the drain will diminish both. Most people know their drain exists. They do not close it because closing it requires a decision that feels final or uncomfortable or like an admission. That admission is worth whatever it costs. The moment you cut the right financial relationship, you often feel it the same week in clarity, in breathing room, in the sense that your momentum has stopped leaking. 3 moves. Income expansion through added output. 1 held asset. 1 eliminated drain. Now, back to the open question. Why do capable people fail to execute moves they understand? Meet Robert. Robert is 28 years old. He works in logistics, earns a reasonable income, and has been reading and listening to financial content for 2 years. He knows the moves. He has 3 browser tabs open about a platform where he can monetize the data analytics work he does every day in his job. He has researched it. He has a plan sketched in a notes app. He has told 2 friends he is working on it, and he has not done it. Not because he lacks courage, not because he lacks information, because the act of beginning will make it real, and once it is real, it can fail. Right now, it is perfect and potential and intact. The moment he starts, that protection disappears. That is the villain in this story. Not fear exactly. Not laziness, certainly. It is the comfort of preparation. The feeling of forward motion that studying and planning and researching produces without requiring any actual exposure to outcome. It feels like progress. It produces none. Robert is not unusual. Robert is most people who have access to the right information and still do not move. The closing window does not care about preparation. It only registers action. What breaks the preparation trap is not more information. It is reducing the size of the first step until the risk of taking it is smaller than the discomfort of standing still. Robert does not need to launch a full consulting practice this week. He needs to send one email to one person offering one specific thing he already knows how to do. One email. Then the thing is real. Then the protection is gone. And then, for the first time, the window is actually available to him, rather than something he is reading about through glass. The tide does not negotiate. It rises and recedes on its own schedule, and the shore looks the same whether you were in the water or not. But the people who were in the water carry something different when they walk back up the beach. They carry what was only available out there, in the deep, during the brief high tide of a specific and unrepeatable window. The question is not whether you understand the 3 moves. The question is which one you will start before this chapter is 24 hours old. Chapter 5. What irreversible decisions actually feel like. The moment you stop being able to change your mind is the moment you start being able to move. That sounds like a warning. It is not. It is one of the most underreported facts about how wealth actually gets built. Not in the planning phase, not in the research phase, but in the moment when all exit ramps disappear and you discover your legs were capable of running the whole time. The reason most people in your position never experience this is that they have been taught to treat reversibility as safety. They stay close to the exit, they keep the escape route warm, and they call it being smart. But here is what that exit route actually costs you. By the end of this chapter, you will understand exactly why closing it is not a risk. It is a release. You started something 24 hours ago, or you are about to. The question from the last chapter is still alive in you. Maybe you wrote something down. Maybe you opened a tab you have not yet closed. Either way, something shifted, even slightly. That shift is exactly what we need to talk about, because the moment between deciding and committing is where most people live for years without ever realizing they are stuck there. Call up the season you were in before these last 3 years unfolded without polishing the memory. Not in terms of your income or your address. Think about the conversations you were having with yourself, the plans you were just about to act on, the thing you said you would start when the time was right. Now ask yourself honestly. When did the time get right? When did you stop waiting? If the answer makes you uncomfortable, stay with it for one breath. That discomfort is not a sign you did something wrong. It is a signal that you are standing exactly at the edge of what this chapter is about. Here is the open loop that will thread through everything you hear next. There is a specific moment in the life of every person who builds real wealth. A moment that does not look dramatic from the outside. It does not involve an announcement or a press release or even a particularly large sum of money. It is a quiet interior moment. And yet people who have passed through it describe it in remarkably similar terms. By the end of this chapter, you will know exactly what those terms are, and more importantly, you will recognize whether you have already experienced it yourself. Let's talk about a woman named Diane. Diane was 31, working in operations for a mid-size company. She had been sitting on a business idea for 4 years. Not a wild idea, a practical one. She had the knowledge, a few potential clients she already knew personally, and a startup cost modest enough to cover with 2 months of careful saving. But she kept the idea in what she called the incubation stage. She had a notebook full of research. She had a spreadsheet. She had a conversation with an accountant friend that went well. Then one day her company announced layoffs. Her name was on the list. She had 45 days until her position ended. She called the clients that week, every single one. 3 said yes before the 45 days were up. She made her first dollar before her last paycheck cleared. She told me later that the strangest part was not the success. The strangest part was the feeling. The day she sent the first invoice, something clicked in her chest. Like a door she had been standing in front of for 4 years had finally closed behind her. She did not miss the door. She had not realized how exhausting it was to keep it open. Notice what happened to Diane. The external pressure did not give her a new plan. She already had the plan. What the external pressure gave her was the one thing she had been withholding from herself: irreversibility. There is a difference that needs to be named carefully here. The wrong version of this idea can destroy you. Irreversible commitment to a direction you have genuinely reasoned through is not the same thing as burning everything down in a moment of frustration. Those are different categories. One is the relief of a door finally closing behind you. The other is a fire. We are only talking about the first kind. The reversible moves in your life right now are the ones you keep revisiting. You already know which ones they are. They are the conversations you have with yourself at 2 in the morning, running the same pros and cons you have run 47 times before, landing in the same place, doing the same nothing. Reversibility keeps that loop alive. Every morning you wake up, the decision is still on the table, still negotiable, still open for revision. And your brain, because it is doing exactly what brains do, treats that open negotiation as its primary job. Energy goes there. Attention goes there. The hours that could have gone toward execution go toward redeliberation. You are not lazy. You are exhausted from a negotiation that was never supposed to last this long. Irreversibility ends the negotiation. Not because the path becomes easier, not because the fear disappears, but because your brain finally receives the signal it has been waiting for. This direction is settled. Now find out how to make it work. That is a fundamentally different instruction, and the brain that receives it behaves differently than the brain still running the loop. This is what the closing window means in practice. Not an abstract metaphor about time running out. A concrete description of the mental state you are aiming for. The window you step through is not the window you are still standing in front of. One position requires constant reevaluation of whether to go. The other requires all of your attention on what to do once you are through. Soon, you will come to a point about the relationship between caution and good financial outcomes that runs straight against the usual belief. Once you grasp that turn, it immediately changes how you act. For now, stay with the mechanics of how irreversibility actually feels on the way in. Most people imagine it feels like a cliff edge. They imagine the moment of commitment as a terrifying freefall. A kind of bravery that only a specific type of person possesses. This is wrong, and it is worth correcting precisely. The feeling of genuine, irreversible commitment is closer to exhaling after a long hold. It is the end of a particular kind of weight. People who have made their irreversible wealth move not impulsive, not reckless, but deliberate and final, consistently describe a few hours or days of what feels like grief, followed by something they almost always call clarity. The grief is real. You are letting go of the version of yourself who was still deciding. That version had a kind of safety to it, even if the safety was mostly fictional. You mourn it briefly. Then something opens up. The clarity that follows irreversibility is not calm exactly. It is more like focus. The noise drops out. You stop reading articles about whether your decision was right because that question no longer has a place to land. You start reading to execute instead of to consider. The actions that follow feel different in quality. They are not exploratory anymore. They are directed. The tide analogy is useful here, but only if you hear it precisely. The tide does not wait for you to feel ready to swim. It does not care about your spreadsheet. It moves because the conditions moved, and it will pull back regardless of whether you got in. The shore, the place you are standing right now, is not where the wealth is. It is where you watch the wealth from. Getting in feels like a shock for the first few seconds. Then your body adjusts. And you are swimming, not drowning, and you wonder for a moment what you were so worried about. But you can only have that realization from inside the water. What you need to know is this. The exhaustion you feel when you think about your financial situation is largely not caused by the difficulty of the situation. It is caused by the ongoing negotiation with yourself about whether to do something about it. That negotiation has a cost that does not show up in any spreadsheet. But you feel it every day in low-grade dread, scattered focus, and the vague sense that time is passing faster than your progress. Ending that negotiation does not require courage in the Hollywood sense. It requires one decision made with enough finality that your brain registers it as settled. That finality can come from external pressure, the way it did for Diane, or it can come from a moment of internal recognition. The moment you hear something and realize you have been arguing with a conclusion you already reached. The wealth moves that actually stick are not the ones made with the most information. They are the ones made with enough information and enough finality. The research has diminishing returns after a certain point. You already know this. You have probably passed that point more than once on a decision you still have not made. Here is what the people who built the lives you are aiming for have in common. At some point, they stopped treating commitment as the last possible resort after all other options collapsed. They started treating it as the thing that makes the other options matter. The window is still open. The question is not whether you are ready. You have been ready. The question is whether you are willing to let the window close behind you. Chapter 6. The income stack that survives any economic shift. Something is draining from your life right now, and it has no sound. It does not announce itself. It does not send a warning. Every morning you wake up inside a single stream of income. That stream is working as your only line, your only defense, your only forward path. The cost of that arrangement is compounding in the background like interest you never agreed to pay. It is not just the money you are not making from a second source. It is the security that money would have bought. The choices it would have kept available. The options it would have protected. All of it quietly disappearing. Not because you failed, but because no one ever showed you how the math of a single income actually works against you over time. That changes in this chapter. You are going to understand what an income stack is, why most people never build one during the only window when building one is relatively easy, and what specifically you can do inside the next 18 months to make your financial position structurally different from what it is today. Willingness was where the last chapter ended. This one is about what willingness actually builds. Think about a chair with one leg. Hold that image. One leg, perfectly shaped, sturdy on its own. The moment any weight shifts, Any pressure comes from an angle the leg was not designed to handle. The whole structure gives way. Not slowly, instantly. That is what a single income stream is. And you probably already know this somewhere in your body. That tight feeling when your paycheck is late. That specific anxiety in the pit of your chest when you hear the word layoffs in the same sentence as your industry. That feeling is not weakness. That feeling is your financial nervous system correctly identifying a structural problem. Here is the open question. Hold it, because the answer will not come immediately. What would it take for an economic shift, a recession, a contraction in your specific sector, an automation wave, anything external and outside your control, to be something you could survive financially without catastrophic damage? Sit with that. Do not rush to answer it. Let the question be real. The income stack is the answer, but understanding what it is requires first understanding what it is not. It is not side hustles in the frantic, scattered sense of the word. It is not working yourself into exhaustion chasing 3 different things at once. It is not passive income as a fantasy you pursue but never build. An income stack is a deliberate architecture of 2 or 3 income streams that do not rise and fall together. The technical term for this is non-correlated. When one stream contracts under economic pressure, the others do not contract for the same reason at the same time. You build that structure not because you are paranoid, but because the world has demonstrated, repeatedly and without apology, that economic shifts do not send invitations. Now here is where the window matters more than almost anywhere else in this entire 18-month period. Building a second income stream while a first stream is healthy is categorically different from building one after the first has been damaged or removed. This is one of the most overlooked truths in personal finance. It gets overlooked because it requires you to act before the urgency feels real. When your primary income is intact, you have time, energy, capital, and cognitive bandwidth to build carefully. You can test, fail small, adjust, and build again. When your primary income is gone or threatened, you have none of those things. You are building under duress. You are building in fear. And the decisions you make in fear rarely become the foundation of something that lasts. The window is the time when your first leg is holding the chair up. That is exactly when you build the second. A man named Darnell worked 12 years in logistics management. Solid salary, annual reviews, a pension vesting in 4 more years. Darnell was not reckless or complacent. He was careful. But he believed the pension and the salary together were the stack, 2 lines of future income from the same source. He did not see the single point of failure. When his company consolidated its regional offices and eliminated his role, both lines cut off on the same day. Not because he was poor at his job, because they were grown in the same soil. Darnell spent the next 14 months rebuilding from a position of fear and financial stress. He made decisions he would not have made if he had built even one small independent stream during the decade he had been earning well. He recovered. But the recovery cost him years. Darnell's situation is not rare. The difference between Darnell and someone else in the same building with the same role who built something separate during the good years is not intelligence or ambition. It is structure, chosen in advance. Here is the income stack in its most practical form. 3 types of streams, each pulling from a different source of economic energy, each survivable when the others contract. The first type is what you could call a skill-based independent stream. This is income generated from something you already know how to do, offered directly to people or organizations who need it done, outside of your primary employment. You are not starting from zero. You have a decade of something. Writing, analyzing, training, building, designing, consulting, repairing, advising. Whatever your primary employment has sharpened in you, there are individuals and small businesses willing to pay for access to that sharpness outside of the corporate structure you currently work within. This stream is not passive. It requires your time, but it responds directly to your effort. It does not depend on your employer's quarterly results, and it can begin generating within weeks, not years. The second type is what you could call an asset-based stream. This is income that comes from something you own rather than something you do. A rental arrangement, a digital product you build once and sell repeatedly, a small stake in something that distributes returns. Asset-based streams take longer to establish. They require more upfront work or capital, but once they are running, they do not require your daily presence. And crucially, they do not contract for the same reasons your employment income might. When companies in your sector slow their hiring, your rental income does not care. When your employer misses earnings targets, your digital product does not know. The insulation is structural, not wishful. The third type is a community-based or network-leveraged stream. This is income that flows from your reputation and relationships rather than from your individual labor or owned assets. Referral arrangements, partnerships, collaborative projects where your network is itself the product. This stream is the most misunderstood because it looks the most like luck from the outside. It is not luck. It is the result of consistently and generously participating in a community or profession in a way that makes other people want to root opportunity in your direction. This stream is also the most recession-resistant of the three because it depends on human trust, and human trust does not collapse the way markets do. Now here is the mirror moment this chapter wants to offer you. Bring to mind the season you were in before these last 3 years unfolded without polishing the memory. The income you had, the skills you had, the relationships you had built. If at that point you had taken one afternoon per week and directed it toward building a second stream from any one of those 3 types, what would that stream look like today? Not as a source of guilt, as a data point. Because 3 years from now, the same calculation will run in reverse. And what you do inside this window will be either the Darnell story or a different one. Most people do not build the stack because of a single invisible obstacle, not laziness, not lack of information. The obstacle is the same villain that has appeared throughout every chapter of this book. Comfortable paralysis dressed up as preparation. You are almost ready. You are close to having enough saved to start. You are just about to have more time. The stack will make more sense when the economy settles. That voice is not your reason speaking. It is your inertia speaking, and it will cost you quietly and daily until the window closes. Here is where the open question from earlier gets its answer. What would it take for an economic shift to leave you standing, not unaffected, not untouched, but standing? The answer is not a larger emergency fund, though that helps. The answer is not a better resume, though that helps too. The answer is that when one stream of income contracts under external pressure, another stream responds to a different set of inputs entirely. The contraction does not become a collapse. That is the stack at work. That is the structure that survives because it was designed to withstand the forces it was always going to face. The tide analogy is useful here. When the tide pulls back, the things anchored in only one place get dragged. The things anchored in 2 or 3 places hold their position, not because they are stronger than the tide, because they are connected to more of the shore. You are inside the window. The water is not pulling yet. This is the time when laying that second anchor, and then that third, is something you can do with care and intention rather than desperation. This is the time when the difference between a prepared architecture and a frantic scramble is still entirely yours to determine. Later on, you will come to a point about timing and financial risk that runs straight against the usual belief. When that point settles, it immediately changes every decision you make about when to move and when to wait. For now, hold this. A single income stream is not a financial plan. It is a single point of failure with a salary attached. The window gives you the conditions to build something that does not fail all at once. What will the second stream be? And how long are you willing to wait before you begin? Chapter 7. Why moderate risk in this window is the riskiest move. Playing it safe right now is one of the most dangerous financial decisions you can make. That sounds like something a reckless person says to justify a bad bet. It is not. It is an observation about what happens to people who stand at the edge of a closing window and choose to step halfway through. Halfway through a closing window does not keep you safe. It catches you. Go back to the way your money was really working back then, without drifting into anything else. Think about whether the careful, measured steps you took since then have actually moved you, or whether they have simply kept you comfortable inside the same walls. The question this chapter exists to answer is not whether caution is ever wise. It is whether caution during a specific, finite, compressing window of time produces the outcome cautious people actually want. By the time this chapter ends, you will never look at moderate commitment the same way again. Not because the idea is new, because you will finally see clearly what it has already cost you. That question from the last chapter is still hanging here in the background. What will the second stream be, and how long are you willing to wait before you begin? Hold that. Let it stay open. Because before you can answer it honestly, you need to understand something about the window you are standing inside, and what it actually demands of the person who wants to walk through it whole. There is a word most people use when they want to sound reasonable: moderate, moderate risk. A moderate approach, moderate exposure to an opportunity. It is the word of someone who wants the reward without the cost of full commitment. In ordinary life, outside of any particular time pressure, moderate can sometimes work. You can take a moderate position in a slow market and wait. You can make a moderate career move and adjust. Time in those situations is forgiving. It absorbs your hesitation. It lets you calibrate. But there is a category of moment where time is not forgiving. Where the window is open and the tide is coming in and the shore you want to reach is visible. The question is not whether to swim. It is how much of yourself you are willing to put into the water. In those moments, a moderate swimmer often ends up worse than someone who chose not to swim at all. That is the thing nobody tells you. Choosing not to enter can be rational. It preserves your energy, your resources, your options. Choosing to enter fully carries real risk, but also carries the only realistic path to crossing. The person who swims halfway out and then retreats has used their energy, absorbed the cold, taken on the danger of open water, and arrived back exactly where they started. Spent wet, no closer to the other shore. Moderate commitment in a closing window does not split the difference between risk and safety. It guarantees you absorb the cost of risk while eliminating your chance of capturing the reward. Let me tell you about Robert. Robert was 29 when a specific opportunity opened in front of him. A small commercial space in his city had become available at a below-market lease, right at the edge of a neighborhood that had just had a new transit line announced. He had watched his cousin, Darnell, stake a full claim on a similar situation 4 years earlier. Darnell was now running a business with 3 employees and a building his name was on. Robert wanted that. He had been thinking about it for 2 years. So Robert moved. But he moved at half speed. He signed the lease, but he kept his full hours at his day job because losing that income felt dangerous. He started building out the space on weekends because he could not justify taking unpaid days. He brought in 1 piece of equipment when the business model needed 3. He told potential clients he was almost ready. Almost ready stretched across 11 months. Across those 11 months, the neighborhood changed faster than he did. 2 better-funded competitors opened within 6 blocks. The transit station brought the foot traffic he had been waiting for, but it brought it to them. His lease came up for renewal at a rate that reflected the new market value of the street, not the deal he had locked in when the street was still quiet. Robert had spent 2 years thinking about the opportunity. He had spent 11 months holding it at arm's length. By the time he was ready to commit fully, the window had closed around the opportunity he had already partly entered. He was not reckless. He was not foolish. He was moderate, and moderate in that specific window was the most expensive position he could have taken. Here is what was actually happening during those 11 months. There is a structure to every real opportunity window, and most people never learn to read it. The window opens with low competition and high uncertainty. That combination makes most people hesitate because uncertainty feels like danger. They wait for more clarity. They take a partial position. They keep 1 foot where they are. But the act of waiting for clarity is the act that eliminates your edge. Clarity is what attracts competition. Every month that passes and the opportunity becomes more legible, more people can see it. The favorable conditions that made the early position powerful begin to compress. The person who waits for certainty before committing fully arrives exactly when the field is crowded and the early advantages are gone. They entered the window when it was closing. And the person who took a moderate position at the right time, which was Robert's position, often ends up in the worst place of all. They committed enough to absorb opportunity costs. They left their previous stable situation partially, or they used capital they cannot recover. But they did not commit enough to actually operate with full momentum. They are carrying the weight of the decision without the speed that full commitment would have given them. Think about where you are right now, not in general terms. Specifically, is there a decision you have been making halfway? A business idea you have spent money on but not time, or spent time on but not money? A skill you have studied without deploying? A relationship, a platform, a project that has your name on it but not your full self? Think about how long it has been in that partial state. Think about whether the conditions around it are the same as they were when you first saw the opportunity. That is the mirror, not a comfortable one, but an accurate one. The question that opened this chapter was about timing. How long are you willing to wait? But the question underneath that question, the one this chapter is pushing you toward, is this: what are you actually protecting with your moderate approach? Protection is the story moderate commitment tells about itself. It says, I am being careful. I am managing my downside. I am not overexposed. And all of those statements can be true and still miss the fundamental fact that during a finite window, the downside you are most exposed to is the downside of not going. As this book keeps moving, you will come to a point about managing risk that runs straight against the usual belief. After that really registers, it immediately changes how you calculate what you can actually afford to lose. But for now, stay with this. The closing window is not a metaphor. It is a description of real market conditions, real demographic shifts, real technological adoption curves, real interest rate environments. Every one of those forces has a direction and a speed. When they align in a way that briefly makes a particular move favorable, that alignment does not last indefinitely. You have been hearing about an 18-month window since the opening of this book. That number is not decorative. It reflects actual conditions, actual compression, actual closing. And inside that window, the most common response is the moderate one. Try a little. Test the water. Stay ready to retreat. It is the response of someone who has learned that the world is unpredictable, so they hedge, and so they stall, and so they allow the window to compress around their hesitation until the moment is gone. They are left standing in the same place they started, holding a list of reasons that all sound perfectly reasonable. Reasonable is not the same as effective. Robert was reasonable. Robert lost the window. Not because he was foolish, but because he used his moderate position as a substitute for momentum. And momentum is the only thing that carries you through a window before it closes. Here is the revelation this chapter has been building toward. In an ordinary moment, moderate risk is moderate risk. The outcomes are proportional. You put in a little, you might get a little. But in a finite window, moderate commitment is not the midpoint between full commitment and no commitment. It is a third option that produces results worse than either of the other two. It consumes the resource of time, which the window is made of. It consumes your mental energy, because half-started things demand more cognitive maintenance than either finished things or abandoned things. And it signals to every part of your behavior that you are not yet serious. That signal is contagious. It spreads into how you talk about the opportunity, how you prioritize it, how much creative energy you bring to it. Moderate commitment creates moderate urgency. And moderate urgency in a closing window is indistinguishable from paralysis. That is the cost of playing it safe inside a window that has a closing date. The window is still open, barely. The tide is still at the shore, not yet pulling back. You still have the ability to choose which category you belong to. Not the moderate swimmer, the person who crossed, or the person who chose to stay on shore with full knowledge and full intention. Both of those positions are defensible. Only one of them is costly. The real question now is not whether you see the window. You see it. The question is whether you are willing to let go of the half measure you have been calling a strategy. Chapter 8. The network effect that only opens during windows. Right now, a door is closing somewhere you cannot see. Not a dramatic slam. A slow, quiet click, the kind you only notice once it has already happened. The door is not made of wood or metal. It is made of proximity, of circumstance, of a particular alignment between where someone important is in their life and where you are in yours. The loss of that alignment compounds. The relationship you do not form this year becomes a decade of introductions that never happen, knowledge that never reaches you. Doors that stay locked not because someone locked them against you, but because the key only existed for a season, and the season passed while you were still deciding whether to pick it up. That is the loss this chapter is about. Not money, not time, people. Specifically, the people who could accelerate everything, and who are closest to you right now in this window, whether you realize it or not. The previous chapter ended with a hard question, whether you are willing to let go of the half measure you have been calling a strategy. That question does not disappear, but this chapter adds a dimension to it. Strategy without the right people moves slowly, and in a window this short, slow is a kind of failure dressed in patience. Here is the open loop, the thread you need to hold. Why are certain people more accessible during some periods of your life than others? The answer sounds simple once you hear it, but most people never hear it. They assume access is about status, about money, about who you already know, Hold that question. The answer will land before this chapter ends, and when it does, it will change how you read every room you walk into for the rest of this window. Wealth is not a solo event. You already know this at some level. You have heard the saying about the 5 people closest to you shaping your income. But sayings flatten things. They remove the texture. What the saying does not tell you is that those 5 people are not a fixed set. They rotate. They arrive during specific conditions, take root if you tend them, and drift if you do not. The people who shaped the last decade of your life were not random. They appeared during a particular pressure point, a school, a job, a crisis, a move, when circumstances pressed you and someone else into the same space at the same moment. That is not coincidence. That is the network effect as it actually works. And here is the part that costs people the most. That effect is not always available. It opens like a window when conditions align, and it closes when those conditions shift. Go back to the season you were in before these last 3 years unfolded, without polishing the memory. Not just what you had or did not have financially, but who was around you. Who were you sitting across from at lunch, at meetings, at late evenings that stretched longer than planned? Some of those people have moved on in ways you could not have predicted, and some people who were not in your life then are in it now, or could be, because you are inside a particular moment. A convergence of industry shifts, economic pressure, and generational transition that has created a rare kind of openness. People who would not normally pick up the phone are picking it up. People who would not normally share what they know are sharing it, not because they have become generous in some abstract way. Because the conditions around them have made collaboration feel necessary. That is the mechanism, and it is closing. Here is a story. A woman named Priya worked as a mid-level operations manager at a logistics company in her early 30s. She was competent, careful, and deeply patient, almost to a fault. For 2 years, she watched a shift happen inside her industry. A wave of smaller freight companies were consolidating. The executives running those companies were suddenly visible in ways they had never been before. They were speaking at smaller regional events. They were posting on professional forums with real candor. They were looking for people who understood the operational side, because the financial engineers who had been running things did not. Priya noticed. She sat with it for 4 months. She prepared. She told herself she was not ready, that she needed one more credential, one more year of experience to feel legitimate. By the time she finally reached out, one executive had filled the role he had been circling around with someone else. The other had retreated behind a layer of assistance once his company closed its latest funding round. The window was not years wide, it was months wide. What Priya lost was not just opportunity. It was the relationship that would have compounded across the next decade. The referral, the cosign, the room she would have been invited into. She is still doing good work, but she will tell you herself that something closed then that has not reopened. The lesson does not need a title. You feel it. Now the practical part. Naming the problem without naming the mechanism is exactly what most books stop at. You are past that. There are 3 specific ways to access high-leverage relationships during a window like the one you are currently inside. The first is entering at the edge. Every high-leverage person has a defended center and a porous edge. The center is their primary reputation, their established domain, their inbox. Reaching them there is expensive, costly in attention and social currency, and most people are not yet positioned for it. But the edge is different. The edge is where they are experimenting, where they are curious, where they are not yet the authority and therefore less defended. Right now, there are people in your field or adjacent to it who are experimenting publicly. starting something new, asking questions in forums, showing up at events where they are learning rather than performing. Find them there, not to pitch yourself, to be genuinely useful in that specific context. One sentence of real insight in a space where someone powerful is vulnerable to learning is worth more than a dozen polished emails sent to their protected center. You do not need permission to enter at the edge. You just need to see where the edge is. The second tactic is the shared pressure handshake. When two people are navigating the same specific difficulty at the same time, the bond that forms is faster and deeper than almost any other kind. This window is generating shared pressure across whole categories of people. Younger professionals dealing with the same inflation, the same uncertain promotion ladders, the same questions about whether their industry will look the same in 5 years. That shared pressure is not just complaint material. It is connection material. When you name something specific and true that someone else is also carrying, they do not feel sold to. They feel seen. And feeling seen is the beginning of loyalty. The tactic is to get precise about what the current moment is actually costing people in your specific orbit. Not generally. Specifically. Name it directly in conversation, in writing, in rooms where you are the one who says the thing everyone else is privately thinking. The person who names the real difficulty first earns a particular kind of trust. That trust is a relationship in its earliest form. The third tactic is the smallest and most underused. It is also the most time-sensitive. It is simply showing up where the window is visible to others. Right now, there are physical and digital spaces, specific conferences, smaller local events, online communities built around this precise economic moment, where the people who have already named the window are gathering. Not the famous ones necessarily. The ones who are 2 to 5 years ahead of you. Those are the most valuable relationships in a wealth-building window, not the distant icons. The proximate achievers people close enough to reach, far enough ahead to pull. They are visible right now in a way they will not be once they have fully arrived. The barrier to meeting them is low because they are still in motion themselves. You have to be physically or digitally present in the same space. There is no algorithmic substitute for that. The tide carries things to the shore, but you still have to stand at the water's edge. In a later section, you will come to a point about how fast real wealth compounds once the right relationship is in place that runs straight against the usual belief. Once that becomes real to you, it immediately changes how long you are willing to wait before reaching out. Now close the loop that was left open at the start. Why are certain people more accessible during some periods of your life than others? The answer is not about your status. It is about theirs. People become accessible when they are in motion, when they are building, searching, uncertain, experimenting. Motion creates openness. Stasis creates walls. And what this economic window has done, whatever its costs, is put an enormous number of capable people into motion simultaneously. The walls are lower right now than they were 4 years ago, lower than they will be 4 years from now. What looks like a difficult climate is also, underneath, an unusual kind of access event. The question is whether you will use it before the movement stops and the walls go back up. The window does not care what you intended to do with it. It only responds to what you actually do. Carry this forward. The people who will accelerate your next decade are not in your future, waiting to be found. They are around you right now, in motion, and they are looking for someone who is also willing to move. Chapter 9. How to compress a decade of wealth into 18 months. The fastest path to wealth is almost never the busiest one. That sounds like comfort people offer when they want you to slow down. It is not. It is a precise description of why the people who appear to be doing less are often the ones arriving first. By the end of this chapter, you will understand exactly what that means for what you do tomorrow morning. You are already moving. The last chapter made that clear. The people who will accelerate your next decade are not in your future waiting to be found. They are around you right now in motion, looking for someone willing to move with them. You have started to see that. Good. Now comes the question that separates the people who stay in motion from the people who eventually collapse from it. The question is this: what specifically should you be doing? Hold that question. It will be answered here, but not yet. Before the answer lands correctly, you need to understand why most people never think to ask it in the first place. Here is what you probably believe about wealth and time. You believe that more effort produces more result. You believe that the person grinding 16 hours a day is building something bigger than the person working 6 deliberate ones. You believe that if you are not exhausted, you are not serious. Somewhere along the way, exhaustion became the proof of commitment. And that belief, more than any lack of skill or capital or connection, is what stretches a 10-year financial climb into a 30-year one. Busy is not compression. Busy is the enemy of compression. Remember the season you were in before these last 3 years unfolded without polishing the memory. Not in abstract terms. Think about the actual day, the actual desk, the actual version of you that existed then. What were you working on? How many hours were you putting in? Were you tired? Probably yes. Now look at where you are relative to where you wanted to be by now. If the gap between the effort you were giving and the results you were getting feels familiar, that is not a coincidence. That is the cost of confusing activity with direction. The tide does not try harder to reach the shore. It simply moves at the right time. Robert Ames was 31 when he decided to do everything. He ran a small digital marketing operation out of a shared workspace in Cincinnati. He had 4 clients, 2 employees, a course he was developing on the side, a podcast he uploaded irregularly, a newsletter he had promised himself he would commit to, and a real estate certification he was halfway through because someone told him passive income was the answer. He was working constantly. He was also, by his own accounting 2 years later, completely still. The money came in steadily but never grew. Every week felt like the week before. He told himself he was planting seeds. What he was actually doing was watering 6 different gardens with 1 cup of water. Nothing was dying. Nothing was growing. The motion was real. The compression was absent. The shift happened in a single conversation with a woman named Patricia. She ran a firm 3 times the size of Robert's while working what she called a slim schedule. She did not offer Robert a strategy. She asked him one question. She said, "If this exact window of market conditions lasted only 18 months and you had to pick one thing to do inside it, what would you do?" Robert said marketing. She said then stop doing everything else. He did not believe her at first. Dropping things felt like losing them. But he gave himself 30 days as an experiment. He shut down the podcast. He paused the course. He told himself the newsletter would return. He put the real estate certification in a drawer, and he pointed every working hour at one thing. Existing clients grew because they finally had his full attention. 2 referrals came in the first month because the quality of his work had visibly improved. By month 4, his revenue had doubled, not because he worked more, because what he worked on finally matched the moment he was standing in. The tide came in. He was already at the shore. Here is the principle Robert discovered the hard way. Time compression is not about doing more. It is about doing only what the window specifically rewards. Say that again slowly in your own mind. Only what the window specifically rewards. Every period of time has a shape. Right now, the window you are inside has a particular shape. It rewards movement over perfection. It rewards specificity over breadth. It rewards visible proof of value over credentials earned in private. And it closes. That is not a motivational claim. That is a structural fact about how windows work. The tide pulls back. The conditions that make certain things easy right now will not be equally easy in 19 months. The question is whether you are spending the current window doing the things that only this window makes possible, or spending it preparing for a version of yourself that will arrive after the window has already closed. Most people choose preparation, not because they are lazy, because preparation feels safe. You cannot fail at preparing. You can fail at doing. And so the comfortable paralysis of perpetual readiness wraps itself around you and calls itself prudence. It is not prudent. It is expensive. The cost is measured in years. Now, to the question you have been holding, what specifically should you be doing? The compression protocol is not a set of tasks. It is a rhythm, and it has 3 parts. The first part is called the single bet. Every week, you identify the one action that, if it worked, would matter more than everything else you could do that week. Not the most comfortable action, not the easiest one. The one that would move the number that actually matters to you. You do that action first before anything else, before the emails and the scheduling and the small frictions that fill a morning. Everything else that week is support for the single bet. Not a second bet, not a parallel bet. The support. This sounds obvious. It is almost never practiced. Most people live inside the second and third and fourth bets because those feel manageable. The single bet requires you to care about the outcome and be willing to see whether it worked. That is uncomfortable. Do it anyway. The second part is called the proof window. Every week you produce one piece of visible evidence that you are someone worth betting on. Not a credential, not a certificate. Something someone else can see and evaluate right now. A result you delivered. A problem you solved publicly. A decision you made and documented. The proof window is how other people in motion recognize you as someone also in motion. Remember what the last chapter told you. They are looking. Your job is to be findable. You become findable not by announcing yourself but by leaving evidence. Write that down in whatever way you write things. Leave evidence. The third part is called the closed door. Every day, you identify the things you are not doing today. Not someday. Today. You name them and you set them aside with intention rather than abandoning them with guilt. The closed door is how you protect the single bet from the accumulation of good ideas that become the enemy of the one great action. Most people carry everything with them into every day. The weight of everything undone becomes the reason nothing gets done fully. The closed door does not delete those ideas. It holds them respectfully outside the room where the real work is happening. 3 parts, 1 rhythm, single bet, proof window, closed door. Robert ran that rhythm for 11 months. At the end of those 11 months, he had 2 employees. He had 7 consistent clients at a fee he would have been embarrassed to quote 2 years earlier. He had a waiting list. He had started to do, deliberately and selectively, one element of real estate investing, because by then it was no longer an escape from his business. It was an extension of it. He did not do more. He did less, specifically. Here is what the compression protocol protects you from. It protects you from the particular cruelty of being busy inside a window and arriving at the end of it with nothing irreversible to show. Irreversible is the word to hold. Money saved is reversible. Money invested in something that cannot be unseen, in a skill that lives in your body, in a relationship that has been tested and proven, in a reputation that precedes you into rooms you have not entered yet. Those are irreversible. The window rewards irreversible moves. When it closes, the reversible things close with it. The tide pulls back and takes the footprints. The stones it moved remain. Before long, you will come to a point about risk that runs straight against the usual belief. When that idea snaps into focus, it immediately changes how you calculate every financial decision you face. For now, stay with this. You have already found the people. You are already in motion. The window that the first chapter named is still open. What you put inside these 18 months will determine what exists on the other side of them. Not because time is magic, because irreversible moves compound, and this window is one of the rare ones where the conditions accelerate that compounding faster than almost any window you will enter again. The single bet, the proof window, the closed door, that is the rhythm, not a promise, a protocol. And the question that will carry you into the next chapter is the one Robert never thought to ask until it was almost too late. What does it cost you, specifically, to wait one more month to begin? Chapter 10. The decisions you cannot undo by waiting. Right now, something is leaving you, not in a dramatic way, not with a warning. It is leaving the way water leaves a glass left sitting on a hot day, gradually, silently, and then suddenly gone. The specific thing leaving you is access. Access to prices that will not return. Access to positions that only open once. Access to partnerships, to entry points, to the particular shape of an opportunity that exists in a specific window of time, and then closes so completely that looking for it afterward feels like looking for a door in a wall that has been bricked over. You may feel like you are standing still while you think things through, but standing still inside a moving situation is not stillness. It is falling behind at the exact rate the situation is moving forward. There is a mechanism driving this loss. It is not the economy. It is not bad luck. It is not your circumstances. It is the comfortable lie that waiting to decide is not itself a decision. This chapter names that lie, and once you hear it named clearly, you will not be able to unhear it. Robert never thought to ask what waiting cost him. That question from the previous chapter, what does it cost you specifically to wait one more month, is the question that stops most people cold the first time they really sit with it. The answer is not comfortable. The answer has a number, and the number keeps changing, growing, compounding in a direction that is not working in your favor. So let us start there. Let us start with the idea of the window. You have heard the window mentioned before in these pages. An open window, the possibility of movement, the air coming through. But a window is not a metaphor here. It is a mechanism. Windows are open for structural reasons, pressure differences, design, intention. And they close for structural reasons too, not because someone decided to be cruel, not because the opportunity was never real. They close because the conditions that held them open change. And when those conditions change, the window does not leave a note. It does not give notice. It is open and then it is not. Here is the open loop this chapter asks you to hold. What specific category of decision becomes permanently unavailable after the window closes? Not harder, not more expensive, permanently unavailable. We will come back to that. But first, you need to feel the weight of what that actually means in practice. Look back at your actual circumstances before these last 3 years unfolded without polishing the memory. Specifically, what was the price of something you considered buying, a property, a stake in a business, a course of training that would have changed your skill set, a conversation with someone you kept meaning to reach out to. Think about what that same thing costs today. Or whether the person is still reachable, or whether the property in that area is still accessible to someone in your financial position. Hold that comparison for just a moment, not to punish yourself, to calibrate. Because that gap, the gap between the price then and the price now, between the open door then and the closed one now, that gap is real. And it is one of the clearest demonstrations that time inside an opportunity is not a renewable resource. There is a woman named Priya who spent 3 years watching a small commercial space 2 blocks from her apartment sit partially vacant. The landlord was motivated. The rent was low. The neighborhood was on the edge of changing. She knew it. She could feel it the way you feel a season turning. She did her research. She drew up the numbers. She thought about it seriously for 3 years. She was never not thinking about it. But thinking and moving are not the same action. She confused one for the other. Then a coffee brand from out of town signed a 10-year lease on that space. 6 months after they opened, 3 other businesses moved to the block. 12 months after that, the rent on every unit on that street doubled. The landlord she never called sold the building. The price she had calculated in her notebook was fiction now. The entry point was gone. Not harder to reach. Gone. Priya is not a cautionary tale about failure. She is an example of someone who was fully prepared, fully informed, and still lost access, because the window was real and she treated it like it would wait for her. It did not wait. The first category of decision that becomes permanently unavailable is price-based entry. Every asset, every market position, every stake in anything has a price that reflects the current understanding of its value. When that understanding changes, when the neighborhood gets discovered, when the technology gets adopted, when the business proves its model, the price moves. And it moves fast. And it almost never comes back down to where it was. You have likely watched this happen with something you once considered. The window for entry at that price was open. Now it is not. This is not theory. This is something you have already experienced. The question is whether you will let it happen again with the specific window you are inside right now. The second category is relationship-based access. Some people, in some phases of their careers, are reachable in a way they will not always be. A mentor who has time before their calendar fills. A partner who is looking before they are no longer looking. A collaborator who is still building their network and will take a meeting they will not take in 4 years when their project is already oversubscribed. These windows are not posted anywhere. You cannot sign up for them in advance. They exist in the intersection of timing and initiative. And when the timing passes, initiative alone cannot recover what was available. A conversation you could have started 6 months ago with someone who is now fully committed elsewhere is not a conversation you can go back and start. It happened in the window. You are outside it now. What makes this category particularly quiet in its loss is that you never quite know the relationship-based window has closed. The person is still there. You can still send the message, but something in the dynamic has shifted. The version of the connection that was possible before is not the version available now. The access was real, and now it is different, not impossible, irreversibly changed. The third category is structural. Some markets, some programs, some pricing tiers, some legal and financial structures that allow you to build wealth in a particular way only exist during specific regulatory and economic conditions. The favorable loan environment that made a certain type of real estate accessible. The tax structure that made a certain type of investment efficient. The early-stage equity terms that a company offered when it was new and is no longer offering now that it has grown. These structural windows are created by conditions outside your control and closed by conditions outside your control. Your job is not to control them. Your job is to recognize when one is open and move while it is. Most people do not move, not because they are lazy, because they are waiting for certainty. And here is the thing about certainty inside a closing window. By the time certainty arrives, the window is already most of the way shut. Certainty is a trailing indicator. It confirms what has already happened. It does not predict what is still possible. The people who build real financial position in a compressed window of time are almost never the most certain people in the room. They are the people who acted at 60% certainty when the window was still fully open, rather than at 90% certainty after it had mostly closed. 60% and moving beats 90% and waiting. The fourth category is the one most people find hardest to accept because it feels the most personal. Some versions of yourself are only available during specific phases of your life. The version of you that could absorb a risk right now, with your current expenses, your current obligations, your current energy, your current lack of anchor, is a version that will not always exist. As life accumulates around you, the risk tolerance that is appropriate and even natural right now becomes harder to access. Not impossible, but structurally different. The person who starts building at 28 is not the same as the person who starts at 36, even if their income is the same, even if their knowledge is better at 36. The life around the decision is heavier at 36. The windows inside which real risk is absorbed with real speed are open more fully at certain moments than others. This is not fatalism. This is not a ceiling. It is a reminder that the version of you who can move right now with full force is a resource. And resources are not infinite. Now close the loop that was opened earlier. What category of decision becomes permanently unavailable? Not harder to make, not more expensive to make, permanently unavailable. The answer is this: the decision to enter at the original moment. That specific entry at that specific price, with that specific structural context, in that specific relationship dynamic, that decision existed once. When the window closes, you can make a different decision about the same general direction, but you cannot go back and make the original one. You cannot buy the house at the price it was listed 3 years ago. You cannot take the partnership terms that were on the table when the founder was still desperate for believers. You cannot be the first one in the room. The room has other people in it now. The tide is the clearest image for this. When the tide is in, the shore is full. You can reach things that will not be reachable when the tide pulls back, and the tide does not ask whether you are ready. It does not wait at the high water mark while you think about whether to walk out. It moves on a schedule that has nothing to do with your readiness. The question is never whether the window will close. It always closes. The question is whether you were inside it when it did. Down the line in this book, you will come to a point about the right moment to begin. Once that lands, it changes how you act under uncertainty that runs straight against the usual belief. But for now, carry this. The decisions that change your position are not the ones made in perfect conditions with perfect information at perfect timing. They are the ones made while the window is still open, before the price adjusts, before the access closes, before the version of you who could absorb the risk has been replaced by a version carrying more weight. The window is not waiting for you to be ready. Are you going to step through it, or are you going to watch it close? Chapter 11, Month 18, What the View Looks Like From There. Saving less is sometimes the most effective path to building more. That sounds like advice from someone who never had to watch their account balance before buying groceries. It is not. It is an observation about where real financial movement comes from, and it points directly at the difference between two people who started in the same place 18 months ago and ended up in entirely different lives. You already know the question the last chapter left sitting in the air. Are you going to step through it or watch it close? This chapter does not ask that question again. This chapter shows you what each answer looks like when the 18 months are behind you, when the window has already done what windows always do, and all that remains is the life you are standing inside. Hold that image for a moment. Two people, same starting line. In month 1, they were both reading the same ideas, feeling the same restlessness, carrying the same private sense that something needed to change. By month 18, they are not even in the same conversation anymore. One of them is you, and this chapter is about which one. There is a detail worth noting before we go further. It changes how this whole picture lands. The gap between these two lives is not the result of one massive decision. It is not a lottery win, not a single stroke of brilliance, not a perfect plan executed without error. The gap is the compounded result of small, repeated, directional choices made inside an 18-month window that was open for both of them equally. That is what makes it matter so much. And that is what makes it almost unbearable to look at when the window closes and you realize which choice you made. Let me show you Robert. Robert is 31 years old. In month 1 of the window, he was making $46,000 a year, renting a one-bedroom apartment with a slow-draining kitchen sink he kept meaning to call about, and carrying about $11,000 in credit card debt spread across 3 cards. He had a savings account with $412 in it. He checked his bank app most mornings with the same dread you check a weather forecast for a trip you are already packed for. Robert knew things needed to change. He felt it every time a colleague mentioned a rental property, every time a friend sent him a screenshot of a brokerage account. But knowing and doing are separated by a distance that most people never cross, because the distance is not measured in miles. It is measured in the discomfort of the first step. Month 3, Robert made a choice. Not a perfect choice. Not a research-to-death, spreadsheet-verified, risk-adjusted to zero choice. A directional choice. He stopped putting the minimum payment on one card and put 4 times the minimum on it instead, cutting something else to make the room. He started putting $80 a month into an index fund. Not a glamorous number. He picked up one freelance client for an extra $300 a month, work that exhausted him some weeks, but did not break him. None of that sounds revolutionary. None of it would generate a headline or a viral post. But he did it in month 3, which meant he did it in month 4 and month 5, and the numbers started to do something that numbers do when you leave them alone long enough. They started to talk to each other. Return to your actual circumstances before these last 3 years unfolded, without polishing the memory. The version of you that existed then, the worries they carried, the money they had, the decisions they were putting off. Now think about how much of today was decided back then, in choices so small they barely felt like choices at all. The direction you walked in, day after day, quietly adding up to the place you are standing right now. That is the mechanism. That is exactly what is happening in this 18-month window, for better or for worse, whether you believe it or not. By month 9, Robert's first credit card was paid off. Not all of them, one. But one card paid off is a psychological event, not just a financial one. It is the first time the math feels real. It is the first time the gap between where you are and where you want to be starts shrinking instead of holding steady. Robert noticed something shift in the way he thought about money. not as a thing that happened to him, but as a thing he was directing, even imperfectly, even slowly. By month 14, his index fund had grown through contributions and a modest market return into just under $4,000. He had added a second freelance client. He had cleared 2 of the 3 credit cards. His net worth, which had been deeply negative in month 1, had moved by nearly $18,000 in the right direction. Month 18. Robert is not rich. Let's be clear about that, because this is not a fantasy. He is not on a yacht. He is in the same apartment with the same slow-draining sink, though he finally called about it. But here is what is different. He has no high-interest debt. He has a small but real investment account that has never been touched, growing on its own momentum. He has 2 income streams instead of 1, and he has something that has no dollar amount attached to it. Evidence. Evidence that he can move money in a direction he chooses. Evidence that the decisions he makes today will exist in a form he can feel 18 months from now. That evidence changes everything about how he walks into the next 18 months. Now let me show you the other version. Same Robert, same month 1, same $46,000, same 3 credit cards, same $412 in savings, same slow-draining sink. This Robert also knew things needed to change. He felt the same restlessness, read the same ideas, had the same conversations with himself at midnight. But he also had reasons. Good ones, actually. Month 2, something came up with the car. Month 4, he decided he should wait until he understood investing better before he put money into anything. Month 6, a friend told him the market was uncertain, which was true, because the market is always uncertain, and that truth became permission to wait. Month 9, he started a course on personal finance that he got 60% through before his schedule made it hard to finish. Month 15, he looked at his accounts and saw almost the same numbers he had seen in month 1. The debt was about the same. The savings account held less. He had learned more, genuinely. He had read and listened and absorbed real information. But the information had not moved through him into the world. It had stayed inside, organized and inert, waiting for the right moment that kept arriving in a form that felt slightly wrong. Month 18. Robert is 31 years old, still renting, still carrying the debt, still checking his bank app with that particular dread. The window he stood in front of for 18 months has closed. Not permanently, life is not that cruel, new windows open. But this one, the exact combination of time and circumstance and opportunity that existed in those specific 18 months, is gone. And what makes it hard to look at is not the money. It is the compounding. Because the Robert who acted at month 3 has 18 more months of momentum behind him. The gap between them is not 18 months wide. It will take the second Robert years to close what the first Robert built in a year and a half. The tide does not hold. That is the image this whole book has been moving toward. The tide does not hold for the person who needs more time to think about the tide. It comes in, it goes out, it does not negotiate with preparation. The shore looks exactly the same before and after. The difference is invisible to everyone except the person standing on it. And they know. Now here is the question that has been open since the first pages of this book. The one you may have been carrying without naming it. The question is not whether the window is real, you already know it is. The question is not whether the principles work, you already understand the mechanism. The question is simpler than either of those, and it has been waiting for you to face it directly. Which Robert are you going to be in month 18? Not which one do you want to be. Not which one you deserve to be, or feel ready to be, or have planned carefully enough to be. Which one will you actually be based on what you do in the next few days, not the next few years? That is the only honest version of the question. The next few days, not the grand arc of your life, not the complete strategy, not the finished plan. The next few days contain the seed of the answer, and you already know what those days need to hold. There is a detail worth naming about the two Roberts that might be the most important thing in this chapter. The one who waited was not lazy. He was not stupid. He was not even particularly fearful, not more than most people anyway. He was caught in the most expensive trap that exists in personal finance. The feeling that preparation is the same as progress. It is not. Preparation is the thing you do before progress. Progress is the thing that changes your account balance, your debt load, your options, your life. You cannot do both at the same time from the same posture. The window is still open. You are still inside the 18 months. The view from month 18, the one where you have evidence, momentum, and the particular quiet confidence of someone who chose to move, that view is still available to you. But it is only available through the door of action taken now, not the door of plans refined until they finally feel safe enough. A little later, we turn toward an argument about risk that runs straight against the usual belief. When that becomes clear, it changes every financial decision you make after this one. For now, this is what month 18 looks like from the inside if you walk toward it. Smaller debt, real assets, multiple income streams, and the knowledge, the bone-level knowledge that you are someone who moved when the window was open. The tide came in. You were standing in it. Chapter 12. The waiter you've been is not who you are anymore. Every era of human history has produced the same two kinds of people, not rich and poor, not lucky and unlucky. The pattern runs deeper than that. In every age, in every corner of the world, there have been people who moved when the moment arrived and people who stood very still, watching the moment pass, telling themselves they were being careful. The movers were not braver by nature. They were not born with something the others lacked. What separated them was a single recognition, one that cut through every reasonable excuse and every comfortable story. They understood that waiting was not neutral. It was a choice, and the choice had a cost. You are living inside that same pattern right now. What you are about to hear is not a call to recklessness. It is an invitation to see the thing you have been calling patience for what it actually is. The tide came in. You were standing in it. And here is what nobody tells you about that moment. The tide does not ask you what you decided. It rises anyway. It reaches you whether you stepped forward or held your ground, and the water feels the same either way. The difference is not where you end up in the water. The difference is whether the water found you moving or found you still. There is a question worth sitting in before the answer arrives. When exactly did you become someone who waits? Because you were not always this person. Think about where you were 4 or 5 years ago. Not the circumstances, not the bank account, not the city or the job or the relationship. Think about how you felt about what was possible. There was a version of you not so long ago that had not yet learned to hesitate the way you hesitate now. That version had less information, less experience, and in many ways less to lose. And yet that version moved. It applied, it asked, it tried things without a completed plan. What happened between that person and this one is the thing worth examining today. Consider a woman named Priya. She had wanted to start a consulting practice for 3 years. She had the skills. She had 2 former clients who had already told her privately they would follow her. She had a savings cushion that would cover 4 months of lean income. She had a spreadsheet built and rebuilt 6 times, projecting her first year. She had a name for the business, a logo idea, a domain she had purchased and not yet used. What Priya did not have and what she was waiting for was certainty. Not more preparation, certainty. The feeling that success was guaranteed before she began. She told herself she was being responsible. She told herself she was not ready. She told herself the timing was not right. Even as the timing aged and softened, and the two clients who had offered their loyalty quietly moved on to someone who had actually shown up. On the day she finally registered her business, 3 years and 2 months after she first drew the idea on a notepad, she realized something that stopped her mid-sentence. She had been ready for a long time. The waiting had not made her readier. It had made her more afraid. Let that land for a moment before anything else. The identity of the waiter is not something most people choose consciously. It accumulates the way sediment does, quietly and slowly, layer by layer. A plan postponed here. A conversation delayed there. An opportunity assessed so carefully that by the time the assessment was complete, the opportunity was gone. Each individual act of waiting feels like wisdom. The accumulation of them becomes a personality, and personalities are difficult to examine because you are inside them. You cannot see the shape of the house you are living in when you are standing in the middle of a room. This is the mirror moment. Think about one thing you have been preparing to do for more than 6 months. Not learning, not saving, if saving is the actual action. Something you have been planning to begin. Now ask yourself honestly what you are waiting for. Be specific. Name the condition. Then ask whether that condition, once met, will genuinely change your probability of success, or whether meeting it will simply produce another condition you will need to meet before you feel ready enough to start. That is how the waiter identity sustains itself. It is always reasonable. It is never finished. Here is what nobody wants to say out loud because it stings on the way in. The permission you have been waiting for is not late. It is not coming. Not because the world is cruel and not because you are unworthy of it. Because the kind of permission you are looking for does not exist outside of you. It never did. The gate you are standing in front of does not have a keeper. You have been waiting at an open gate. The window this book has been circling is not decorative. Earlier in these chapters, it appeared as an image of opportunity, open and specific to this period of your life. Right now, in chapter 12 of 14, the window is still open. But you are not standing across the room from it anymore, wondering if the view is real. You are standing directly in front of it. The question is no longer whether to move toward it. The question, the only question, is whether you will acknowledge that you already know what you need to do, and that the knowing has been there longer than you want to admit. The waiter identity has one more trick before it releases you. It will try to reframe your recognition as a new version of preparation. You will feel the clarity of this moment and think, now I need to make a plan. Now I need to organize what I know. Now I need to translate the feeling of readiness into a checklist before I act. That is the identity reasserting itself. Clarity is not a prerequisite for action. Clarity is what action produces. Think about every irreversible decision you have ever made that turned out well. Getting into it was never as clear as you remember it being. The clarity you associate with those decisions was built in the doing, not before it. The brain reconstructs confidence backward and calls it foresight. You felt uncertain then too. You moved anyway, and the moving gave you something standing still never could have, evidence that you could. The tide metaphor is worth one final pass. Tides do not punish. They do not reward. They are indifferent. But the shore is changed by every tide that moves across it, whether the person standing on it is ready or not. The next 18 months will move across your shore. The question that has been building across every chapter of this book comes down to this. When the water recedes, what will it have found? You have been waiting for the right version of yourself to arrive before you begin. That version is not ahead of you. You are already it. The waiter you have been is a character you played while you were building toward this. The role has served its time. Who you are now does not wait for permission. Who you are now steps through the open window because standing still has a cost you can finally see clearly. And the window is still open. Chapter 13. The window mover steps forward, not around. You know the window is open. You have known it for a while now. And still, something in you keeps finding the next thing to read, the next detail to confirm, the next condition that needs to be right before you move. Notice that. Not with shame, with honest curiosity. The hesitation you are feeling right now is not actually about information. You have enough information. It never was about information. The hesitation is something older than that. Something that lives below the rational mind and has one job, to keep you from making a move you cannot take back. And here is what that instinct will cost you if you let it run the show. Not just money, time. The specific, irreplaceable window of time sitting open in front of you right now, waiting, while the part of you that calls itself cautious keeps asking for one more sign. This chapter is about what happens when you stop asking for signs. When you move because the window is open, not because you are certain. The window is still open. That sentence ended the last chapter. Hold it for a second. The natural next question is not how long it stays open. The natural next question is what you are going to do while it is. There is a man named Robert. He is 31 years old. He works a project management job that pays him decently, and he has spent the better part of 2 years building what he calls his plan. The plan lives in a folder on his laptop. It is thorough. It has projections. It has contingencies. And for 26 months, the plan has stayed in the folder while Robert has stayed in his apartment, feeling the particular exhaustion that comes not from working too hard but from preparing endlessly without moving. One Tuesday in October, Robert opens the folder again. He means to refine the numbers one more time, but this time he notices something he has not let himself see before. The plan has not changed in 4 months. The numbers are the same. The logic is the same. He has not been refining anything. He has been rereading the same document and calling it preparation. He closes the laptop. He sits with that for a long time. The next morning, Robert does something small and permanent. He opens an account he has been meaning to open for 2 years. He funds it with 1 month of savings, not a dramatic sum, not a life-altering figure, but real money, moved from somewhere comfortable to somewhere with stakes. He does not feel triumphant. He feels slightly sick. And then, underneath the slight sickness, he feels something else. Something he does not have a word for at first, but later he will describe it as solid, like a floorboard that finally stopped creaking. Robert made one move, one irreversible move, and the entire shape of his identity began to reorganize around it. That is worth sitting with. Picture your actual circumstances before these last 3 years unfolded without polishing the memory. Not in terms of circumstance, in terms of who you were willing to be. What were you preparing for then that you are still preparing for now? What has the preparation protected you from? Not failure necessarily. Something more subtle. The experience of having actually tried and having it be real and being unable to pretend anymore that you were just about to start. Preparation is reversible. You can always prepare more. That is exactly the problem. Here is the principle that Robert stumbled into on that Tuesday in October. A window mover is not someone who is never afraid. A window mover is not someone who has perfect information or zero doubt or a guarantee waiting on the other side. A window mover is someone who understands one thing with unusual clarity. The window being open is the signal, not certainty, not readiness. The open window is the only credential required. This is what separates the people who look back on an 18-month period and say that was when everything changed from the people who look back on the same period and say I was almost ready. The almost ready ones were not less intelligent. They were not less capable. They were simply waiting for a different kind of permission. Permission that the window does not offer and has never offered. The window offers one thing only, an opening, and then, eventually, a close. There is an image that keeps returning throughout this book, the tide and the shore. The tide does not wait for you to feel ready to walk toward it. It moves on its own schedule, according to forces that predate you and will outlast you. You can learn those forces. You can map the tides. You can stand at the water's edge with your shoes in your hand, having prepared everything correctly, and still miss the moment because you were waiting to feel certain before you stepped in. The water does not care about your certainty. The water cares about whether your feet are wet. Early in this book, a window appeared, not as a metaphor you had to interpret, but as something almost physical. A specific span of time, these 18 months described as the kind of interval that shows up a few times in a life, and that most people only recognize from the other side. The question the book planted then was this: what would it mean to actually step through instead of watch it close? Robert stepped through. Not dramatically, not all at once. With one small, irreversible action on a Tuesday morning, feeling slightly sick, sitting with what solid actually feels like. And here is the thing about irreversible moves. They do not just change your circumstances. They change what you are willing to call yourself. Before that Tuesday, Robert was someone who had a plan. After that Tuesday, Robert was someone who had moved. Those are not the same person. The second person has evidence. The second person has a reference point. The first person never had the actual experience of having done something that could not be undone, and having survived it, and having found that it was survivable. That reference point is what builds the identity of a window mover, not a personality type, not a set of traits you either have or do not have. A window mover is simply someone who has moved when the window was open enough times that moving has become more familiar than waiting. The first time is the hardest. Every time after that, you are building on what you already know about yourself, that you are someone who acts when the moment is real. You are standing in a real moment right now, not a hypothetical, not a thought experiment. The 18 months you are inside are actual time, moving at the actual pace that time moves, indifferent to whether you are ready. The window does not dramatize itself. It does not announce its closing. It simply, one day, is no longer open in the same way it was. And on that day, the only question that will matter is what you did while the air was still moving through it. A window mover does not wait for certainty. They move when the window is open. They trust the motion itself to carry them to the next thing they need to know. There is one chapter left, and it will ask something of you that this whole book has been building toward. Chapter 14. The window stays open exactly long enough for one step. Every civilization that has ever risen and fallen left behind the same evidence. Not in monuments, not in written law. In the stories people told about the ones who moved when it was time to move, and the ones who waited until the moment had passed. Those who waited spent the rest of their lives explaining why the timing was never quite right. The pattern is older than any economy, older than any market, older than any system human beings have invented to organize wealth and work and ambition. In every era, Across every culture, there were people who stood at the edge of an opening and stepped through. And there were people who stood at the same edge and studied the opening so carefully that they were still studying it when it closed. You are standing at that edge right now. This chapter will not let you stay there. Here is the question that has been running underneath every word in this book. It was planted in the first chapter and has been pulling at you ever since. Not whether the window is real. You already know it is. The question has always been simpler and harder than that. Will you step through before it closes? Or will you be the person who later says they saw it, understood it, and waited just a little too long? You will not wait. But let us be honest about what waiting actually feels like. Because it almost never feels like waiting. It feels like preparation. It feels like research. It feels like the responsible thing to do. There is a version of you that has spent months, maybe years, gathering information, making notes, bookmarking articles, listening to voices like the one in this audio, and genuinely feeling like that activity is forward motion. It is not forward motion. It is the comfortable paralysis of perpetual preparation wearing the costume of prudence. It costs more than any bad investment you have ever made, because at least a bad investment is a decision. Paralysis dressed as preparation is a refusal to decide while pretending to be on the way to deciding. That is the villain in this story. Not a bad economy, not your background, not the people who started earlier or had more help. The villain is the version of you that is very, very good at making preparation feel productive. Think about where you were 18 months ago, not in the abstract, specifically. What was your bank account number? What was your rent or your mortgage payment? What was the thing you told yourself you would start doing once you had more information, more money, more confidence, more time? Now think about what those 18 months actually produced. Not what they could have produced in some ideal scenario. What they actually produced. If the gap between those two things creates any discomfort in you right now, that discomfort is not a punishment. It is a compass. It is pointing at the one variable that makes the difference. That variable is the moment of first action. Here is a woman named Clara. She was 31 years old, working as a project coordinator for a mid-sized logistics company. She made enough to cover her bills and save a small amount each month. Clara had been thinking about buying her first income property for 2 years. She had a folder on her laptop with 47 saved listings. She had read 4 books and listened to dozens of hours of audio just like this one. Every month she found one more thing to learn before she felt ready. One month it was tax implications. The next month it was insurance requirements. The month after that it was neighborhood analysis. Clara was the most educated person she knew on a decision she had never made. Then her friend Marcus, who had read 1 book and listened to nothing, bought a duplex in a mid-sized city 2 hours from where he lived. He made mistakes, several of them. He paid too much for a repair in the first year. He misjudged one tenant. He spent 3 weekends on things he could have delegated. At the end of year 2, he had an asset paying him $600 a month above his expenses and growing in value. Clara is still reading. Marcus is still collecting. The difference was not knowledge. The difference was one step that could not be undone. There is something that happens the moment you take an action that cannot be reversed. Your brain begins treating the future differently. Before the irreversible step, every plan exists in the category of things you might do. After the step, the future exists in the category of things you are doing. That shift is not motivational. It is neurological. You become a different decision maker the moment you have skin in the game. The question changes from whether to how. And how is a problem your brain is extraordinarily good at solving once turning back is no longer the easiest option. Reversible decisions do not create this. Only the irreversible ones do, which is exactly why the part of you that prefers comfort has spent so long keeping you in the land of reversible thinking. Keep researching, keep planning, keep preparing. All of it can be undone tomorrow. None of it requires you to become someone who has actually done the thing. The window does not care about your research folder. The window stays open exactly long enough for one step. Here is what no one tells you about that step. It does not need to be large. It does not need to be the right step in hindsight. It needs to be real, and it needs to happen in time. A small, irreversible action taken inside the window is worth more than the perfect large action taken 6 months after it closes. The tide does not wait for you to find the ideal boat. The tide moves. You can catch it in whatever vessel you have, or you can stand on the shore with a beautifully designed boat you never finished building, watching the water recede. Now here is what this chapter is actually asking of you. Not a mindset, not a vow, not a renewed sense of motivation that will feel powerful for 48 hours and then dissolve. This chapter is asking for one specific, concrete, irreversible action you can take within the next 60 minutes. Not tomorrow, tonight, before this audio has been forgotten under the weight of an ordinary day. The action will be different for everyone listening, but it follows a single rule. It must be something that creates a record or a commitment outside your own head. Decisions that live only inside your mind are not decisions. They are intentions. The world does not pay you for intentions. If you have been waiting to open the investment account, open it right now and fund it with whatever you can move tonight. Even if that number feels too small to matter. Small and real beats large and imaginary every single time. If you have been waiting to send the email to the person who offered to connect you 6 months ago, write it tonight and send it before you sleep. Do not draft it, send it. If you have been waiting to make the call that starts the process, find the number right now and put it in your calendar for tomorrow morning. Choose a time when you will not be able to reschedule. Lock it in a way that costs you something to break. One action, real, not theoretical, outside your head, not inside it, tonight. Because here is what the entire 18 months has been building toward. It is not a strategy. It is not a framework. It is the oldest and most reliable truth about the relationship between human beings and opportunity. The window has always been the window. The tide has always been the tide. What changes is where you are standing when the moment arrives. Right now, you are not a person who has not yet started. You are a person who is about to close the gap between the life they imagined and the life they are building, with one step that cannot be undone. Every plan you have ever made dissolves into noise the moment the window closes. One real step does not. The tide is already at the shore. Step in.